Okay, Ron.
Okay, thanks everybody for coming tonight. Our guest speaker tonight is Tim Hiatt. He is the chair of the WASBA Legislation Committee, member of the WSDA's Apiary Advisory Committee, and board member of True Source Honey. He is the second generation beekeeper whose family's bees pollinate crops in California, Washington, and the Dakotas. He supports the WSU Honeybee Research Program and is a member of the search committee to fill in new honeybee and pollinator research and extension positions. He spends most of his time in Ephrata, although his bees do not. Let's all give a warm welcome to Tim. And Tim, you got the floor.
Very good, thank you. You're hearing me all right then?
Hear you loud and clear.
Perfect. Well, thanks for inviting me. I'm really happy to talk about this legislative stuff that I do. I'll try to keep the history of it short so we can maximize our time in questions and answers. I'll first give an introduction for myself beyond what Ron said, and then I'll go over the history of the legislative stuff since I've been involved, and then we'll do Q&A. So I'm part of a family beekeeping business, second generation. I've been beekeeping personally full-time since 1993, I think. And yeah, my brothers and I pollinate crops in California and Washington, and we make honey in the Dakotas. And it's full-time for us. So I first got involved in the legislative thing. When was it? It was probably the early 2000s, I guess. And there we go. Uh-oh, I hit it twice. Went too far. There we go. Look, one too many. Okay, just one. I got involved in, well, first off, why do we even need a beekeeper in Olympia? And really there's two reasons. One is agriculture. Honeybees are a huge service to agriculture. You'll see on the graphic that apples are the leading agricultural commodity in the state with $2.1 billion of production, and it's 100% dependent on honeybees. And then down the list is cherries and pears. They're also 100% dependent, as well as berries, seed crops, so vegetable seed crops. So that's a huge deal that honeybees need to do well in Washington State so that we can support those pollinated agriculture. The other reason is that honeybees provide ecosystem services. And I'll have a slide on that a little bit later. But yeah, and this is why the Department of Agriculture in the state of Washington gets involved with honeybees, because they're of such huge value to agriculture in our state. In fact, Washington is the #2 state in the nation in terms of acres under pollinated agriculture. As you can see, California almonds is the elephant in the room. There's 1 million+ acres of almonds in California, and every blossom requires a bee to visit it. The outside of the almonds, California is still #1 in pollinated acreage, but Washington's #2 in the nation. So it's not insignificant that we have healthy bees and a strong program to help protect those bees. These are the ecosystem services that I mentioned. In addition to pollination, folks like you guys with backyard beehives provide these ecosystem services, and it's especially important in areas where there's lots of roads and parking lots and buildings and parks where they just have green grass and they spray for weeds and flowers. You provide the pollination services for neighborhoods and cities that otherwise wouldn't be available because native pollinators really have a tough time living in city limits. So yeah, ecosystem services are another important aspect of what we do, and you guys are really involved in that. So I got involved in about 2010, 2012. I was drafted by then president of WASBA, Mark Emmerich, to be the legislative chair. I had shown some interest in going to Olympia and telling the legislators that we were having trouble with CCD and that the legislature needed to do something to support bees or we were going to have trouble with pollination in the state. And Mark saw that I was enthusiastic and said, here, you should join WASBA and be the legislative person. So I did. And one of the first things the legislature responded to us with was creating a honeybee work group. And it had beekeepers and farmers and people from State Department of Ag and others who met together and prepared a report to the legislature on things that the legislature could do to help honeybees. There were several suggestions in the report, and the first one I tackled was taxation. The honey beekeepers had been taxed like any other business in the state, and I thought, and several of us thought, that they should be taxed similarly to the rest of agriculture, because we are agriculture, and we're regulated by the Department of Agriculture. And we were successful. And so beekeepers are not subject to B&O anymore. They used to be, and several other things, no sales tax due when you sell beehives, no sales tax or use tax due when you buy massive quantities of bee feed. When we made the proposal to the legislature for this, we said all beekeepers. And then they took that and it went through the legislative process, passed the Senate, passed the House, but they weren't in the same form. So they had to come together in conference to hammer out the details. And when it came out of conference, they had a thing in there saying this only applied to beekeepers with $10,000 or more of revenue in a year. I was disappointed to see that. That's not what I wanted, but it was better than nothing. And I can kind of see that. The Department of Revenue doesn't want to have somebody, claiming stuff that they don't really have a right to. And if you're only having the large beekeepers able to, the ones who pay B&O should be free from that, and some of these other tax issues. So I can kind of see it, but it isn't what I wanted. But we don't get all of our victories just the way we like them. Another thing we did was tried to improve forage in the state, and this didn't really work out. I mean, it was neat to learn the legislative system and how things work. This bill that we did pass, the governor signed it, told the Department of Agriculture to do some pilot studies of taking noxious weeds that are good for honeybees and replacing them with non-noxious weeds that are still good for honeybees. But unfortunately, I didn't know that much at the time about how to write legislation, and it passed, but the money we asked for was like $40-something thousand to do this study. And we should have asked for more than 50, because by the rules, if we'd asked for more than 50, then it would have been a line item in a budget. If it was less than 50, it was not. It was supposed to be funded out of general funds for agriculture, and they have declined to fund it so far. The people who were trying to do it were getting started. They asked for people's participation, but then money disappeared, so it hasn't happened yet. But it was a neat idea, and I learned a lot, and it raised the awareness of the folks in the legislature for the needs of honeybees and having good forage. Another thing we wanted was more research on honeybee problems. And so in the year that we brought this to the legislature, I produced this graph. So this is the same 10 states that I showed you in the list of states ranked by acres under pollination. That's the number of researchers in each of those states at that time. See, Washington only had Steve Shepard at WSU. And so, and someplace like Pennsylvania, who had a teeny tiny bit, had 3. So this is part of the reasoning I went to the legislature with and asked for support from the grassroots, you guys, to get this passed. And it did. And they funded Brandon Hopkins' position. So that we were really pleased with that. That was a good thing for us. In that time, we went to the Capitol and we did a sidewalk fair thing for the legislature, and we had a really good time. It was a lot of fun. That's me in the tie with flowers on it. And yeah, part of what we do is just keeping the legislature enthusiastic about honeybees and our issues. And we're a real nonpartisan cause, you know. People on both sides of the aisle love honeybees. They love eating fruit. They love honey. And so, you know, we can easily work with Republicans and Democrats and anybody in the legislature at all. Because some political issues are like a lightning rod, and you draw opposition and stuff when you take one side or the other, but everybody can be in favor of honeybees. And this was from a different fair. We did this in the Capitol Dome in Olympia. We were giving out literature and telling about honeybees. We had 8 different honeys for people to taste. That was really fun. So anyway, so the legislature heard our pleas for more support for honeybees and beekeepers due to CCD. And so they put, after the honeybee work group finished its work, made its report to the legislature, we came to the legislature with some ideas, and a few were passed, like I mentioned. And then they came out, they directed us and others to do the same thing again, which was put together a honeybee and pollinator task force to be run by the Department of Agriculture and to make more recommendations to the state on what they can do for not only honeybees, but for pollinators generally. And one of the things that was recommended by the pollinator task force was this section, and this is from the approved law, and this got us a 3rd beekeeper position at Washington State University. And that new position is going to be called the Honeybee and Pollinator Research and Extension Assistant Professor or something like that. As mentioned, I'm on the steering committee for that hiring process, and we're in the final stages of hiring a person, and I'm super excited because we have some really good people that have applied and we've interviewed. And yes, because of our work in the honeybee task force, we got this new position for WSU. I know it's been a strain on Steve Shepard and Brandon Hopkins to do extension work because their job descriptions don't include extension, or if they do, it's just a tiny little bit. They really aren't paid to do any of this, you know, answer our questions as beekeepers. They're supposed to be research. And this new position is 50% research and 50% extension. So I'm really excited that we can have someone a scientist who's informed, aware of the latest research, and can come out and visit us in our clubs and in state association and let us know what's going on and be available to answer questions and whatever else they can do. They were talking about developing more instructional materials and training. So I'm really looking forward to how that turns out. So that same task force made some recommendations that I didn't like. Maybe you've been watching the WASBA legislative update emails I've been putting out in previous years. So this is a section out of a proposed, it was a bill, it wasn't a law, it was proposed to be a law. And the part 1, 2, 3 are in existing law, and they wanted to add a number 4 that would have had the Department of Agriculture, would have required them to keep a map of the location of every apiary in the state and make that available to people. And that garnered a lot of resistance from many beekeepers. And so at the end, we can talk more about that, but we successfully banded together as the grassroots and were able to defeat that for the time being. So being the legislative person for the state means passing good stuff, but it also means stopping bad stuff. Here's another one that it was a proposal by the task force that I fought against, and the jury's out on what's going to happen on this. So in case you didn't know, there are those in the environmental community who view honeybees as an invasive species. And yes, technically it's true. They've only been here since like 1600. But technically they're invasive, and they're worried that honeybee diseases may spill over into the native bee population. And so there was a proposal to eliminate honeybees from several areas in the state. I know a few beekeepers who previous to these years had permits with Washington Department of Fish and Wildlife to put bees on their land. And it's great for them because they can get out from agriculture and get away from pesticides, or get out from the urban environment and put the bees someplace where they can find clean forage. And I've been in touch with one such beekeeper whose contact in Fish and Wildlife is saying, oh, you shouldn't really apply, and we really don't want you back, and trying to put up roadblocks for that person to come back. And it's a shame, because I've looked at the research for that, and so far there's no evidence of any pathogens spilling over. None at all. Now, the Xerces Society sued last year to stop all honeybee permits in the national forests. And the Logan Bee Lab, the USDA Logan Bee Lab, had been tasked with doing a big study to see if in actuality there was any pathogen spillover from honeybees to native bees. And they were in the second year of that study, and Xerces filed the lawsuit anyway. So it was a big disappointment for beekeepers to see this combat against beekeepers who are just trying to find good places to put bees. One of the things that groups such as that say, that honeybees shouldn't be allowed to be in natural settings, is that one apiary extracts from the land enough pollen and nectar to support 1 million native bees. And yes, that's true, but there aren't 1 million native bees, or there isn't in nature 1 million native bees within the range of one apiary. It's disingenuous on their part to say that. And for me, around my apiaries in Washington, I see native bees all the time. So I really doubt that there is a problem. The science is not settled on that, but it's a shame that some folks are insisting that there be restrictions when the science isn't clear. But this is another thing that we're fighting in the task force. So this was our last legislative action. We put forward a bill to grant liability protection for beekeepers. And it's based on a West Virginia law, I think, but it goes farther. It's really a first of its kind rule in the nation. And it's really simple. That's the whole law right there. It says that if you have an apiary and you register as a beekeeper with the Department of Agriculture, and you place your bees according to whatever city, town, or county rules there are regarding beekeeping, you won't be liable for civil damages for anything in connection with what you do there, unless you have been grossly negligent or willfully misconducted yourself. So that's a pretty high standard of liability from what I understand. In our first hearing at the legislature, the lobbyist for the trial lawyers testified, oh, this is much too broad. We need to dial this back. And the committee agreed. So it was dialed back to something that was equivalent of just whatever liability protection a normal person has just walking down the street. It basically made the bill say nothing above whatever protections were already in the law. So it passed the House, went to the Senate. And we were for the Senate Law and Justice or whatever committee that would hear this. And the chair of the committee said, you know, this really doesn't do anything. I think it should be gross negligence or willful misconduct. And so they struck the language as passed by the House, inserted that language that we originally wanted, passed the Senate, and in the rush at the end of the legislative session, the House concurred. So we got what we wanted originally. So that was really neat to see the thing go. But yeah, the chair of that committee kind of saw through what was going on and made it good for us. So as long as you do those things, register as a beekeeper with the state and conform to the local rules, you're good to go, unless you're really a bad, on purpose bad beekeeper. And this was the bill signing for that one. I'm the one, two to the left, the governor with the flowers on his tie. And Strom Peterson to the right of the governor with the glasses. He's a representative and he sponsored the bill. He sponsored many bills for us and has been a friend of beekeepers. Our lobbyist is Tim Johnson. He's second to the left of the governor in the back with the cool mustache. He's a beekeeper himself and he's done great work with us. He's given great advice. He's lobbied for us on some issues. He's always there to talk to the members of the legislature about honeybee issues. And we would really be ineffective without his advice. And he cuts us a great deal on his fees. So that's pretty much all I had. So there's my email address on the screen. I'd be happy to discuss these issues or anything you want to talk about. I understand that there are some questions about the survey. That was one of the things that the task force agreed to have happen, to survey beekeepers about what they wanted to see in a bee program. And so that survey just came out here a couple of weeks ago or 3. I can answer questions about that as well. So it was great to present. I look forward to answering your questions.
Yeah, hi, Tim. My name is Pat. Can cities or counties change their rules? I mean, do they need permission from the state to change any of those rules?
No, they don't. They can change them as they see fit. As I understand that right now, the city of Bothell currently doesn't have any rules about beekeeping. Some do, some don't. But the city of Bothell wants to put some rules in. And they reached out to WASBA to see if anybody from inside the city of Bothell who is a beekeeper would want to participate. And if you haven't heard about that effort, go ahead and email me your name and stuff and I'll hook you up with that. So yeah, I guess city of Bothell last year had some kind of issue with bees on somebody's land. I don't know the details, but they want to put a rule in to help govern that so they don't have problems in the future. So yeah, but yeah, they can do that. The city council can put in rules about beekeeping and how many hives and how far away from the property line, and if you have to have a fence, how high the fence can be or not, or whatever. So yes, they can do that. But hopefully the beekeepers will get involved in the making of rules so that they make sense and they're livable. Did everybody fill out their survey they got from State Department of Ag?
No, should we be doing that?
Well, they were gonna, so the deal on that was in the task force, all the beekeepers in the task force said, we don't need to register our locations with the state. We don't need to register our locations with a private company. And the pesticide applicators really wanted it. It was their idea and they really wanted it. And they're lobbying hard for it. And the language to implement it went to the legislature in spite of the beekeepers that were on the task force, in spite of their disagreement with it. And so that made me have to go to the legislature and argue against it. Say that we like this bill, it's good for pollinators, except for this one part. And that's that one part that that with everyone's grassroots support, we were able to get shot down and turned into instead a requirement that the task force or the Department of Agriculture do a survey of the beekeepers. Now, the person in charge of that survey is doing a scientific study, a sample. They're doing a random sample of all the registered beekeepers in the state, and they're sending out surveys, I guess, by mail that are numbered. And if you get one of those, you should fill it out and return it, because if you don't, they'll follow up with you and ask why you didn't do it and so forth. But beyond that, there is a link to that somewhere. I think I posted it in an email somewhere. Anyway, yeah, it's that survey is supposed to guide the Department of Agriculture going forward in terms of what they should or shouldn't do for beekeepers. So, yeah. Okay, the link to that survey, if you want to take it, it's at surveymonkey.com/R, the letter R, /2020 beekeeper with no spaces. Again, that link is surveymonkey.com/R, the letter R, /2020 beekeeper, no spaces. And you can take the survey yourself as well. Perfect. Thank you, Jennifer. It's in the chat. Yep, that's the one. Should I explain some more about that survey, since I think somebody wanted to? That's one of the reasons I was asked on to talk about that. So unless someone has a question, I'll let you think of questions then, and I'll tell you more about the survey. So the 3 questions that the survey is getting at is, do you want to have your hive locations registered with the state or with a private company? And then the 3rd question was, do you want a state apiarist? So the first 2, hive location registration, that would be new. We only register as beekeepers with the state and how many hives we have or expect to have. We don't register our locations. When you register with the state now, you give an address, but that's just your mailing address. It's not where your hives are necessarily. So let me see. Oh, that address didn't work for you. Okay, I'll copy and paste it right into the chat. There, that's in the form of a link. Let me know if that works. So anyway, the pesticide companies really wanted to see this hive location registration under the guise of protecting honeybees. The logic is, if the pesticide applicators know where honeybees are, they can notify the beekeepers and not spray them. But I run bees in California, a state that has a apiary location registration system, and it's required by law. And it doesn't do anything for us. What it amounts to is liability protection for the pesticide applicators. What they do is the law says they have to notify 45 minutes before they spray, excuse me, 48 hours, 48 hours before they spray. And then they're free to spray, whether or not you've moved your bees. If you're out of town, too bad. If you're sick and can't move your bees out of the way, too bad. It amounts to a liability protection for the growers, because if your bees get sprayed and you sue them for damages, they go to court and say, I gave the notification as required by law. It's their fault for not getting out of the way. And that's why the pesticide people wanted to see that in Washington. The reality is that the vast majority of pesticide applicators are responsible. They contact the landowners, they contact the beekeepers before they spray, and they work something out. The growers where I have my bees, they know who I am, they have my phone number. If they're going to spray, they let me know, and we work something out together. And I really treasure the relationships I have with the landowners where I keep my bees. And such a system like this would depersonalize that communication. The pesticide people say, oh, it's going to improve communication to make it easier to contact beekeepers. No, it's going to make it less personal. It's going to depersonalize it by allowing pesticide applicators who don't want to be bothered to actually protect bees to simply give an automated notification. I've had voicemails that were just a recorded voice saying, we are going to be spraying a crop near one of your apiary locations. It is at township 148, range 27, section 5, blah, blah, blah. And that's it. I've had others call and explain what's going on. But in my experience, the apiary registration system is a protection for the growers and the applicators, not for beekeepers. Now, in a state like Dakota, like North and South Dakota, Montana, the leading honey production places in the nation, apiary location registration is kind of a protection for the beekeepers. It prevents them from putting their apiaries too close together. But in Washington, not really. So that's what's going on with this this survey. Two of the things, and it's to me, it's kind of disingenuous in the survey. It asks priming questions like, are you concerned with pesticides? Are you concerned with other beekeepers' bad beekeeping practices? Are you concerned, about these things? And then it has the questions following of, would you want hive registration to protect your bees from pesticides? Well, you put it that way, it makes it pretty hard to say, no, I don't want registration, but they're counting on beekeepers being uninformed and naive and thinking, oh, of course I want to have protection from pesticides. I should let them know where my bees are. Now, in our task force meeting, the lobbyists for the pesticide companies brought up a very good point. Someone said, oh, this would be great for the hobbyists who have a beehive in their backyard and someone has to spray across the fence. And the lobbyists for the pesticide company said, no, that's not right. The people who spray in an urban environment, apply pesticides there, are very, very professional and they allow no drift. I mean, how could they? If you're in an urban environment, you can't have pesticides drifting into someone else's yard where there's children or pets or fruit trees or gardens. They have to be in, that's what she said, that they have to be very, very professional. So even in an urban setting, notifying the neighbors about a pesticide application, they're more professional than that in an urban environment. It's the agricultural environment where pesticides drift on the wind and can knock your bees down really bad. And then the third question on the survey was about establishing a state apiarist. And, state apiarist could be a good idea if you got the right person in the job. Personally, I'm really looking forward to this new position at WSU that's going to be 50% research, 50% extension. I'm looking forward to having a scientist be able to come in from Washington and present the latest research.
Hey,
So
Tim,
oh, go ahead.
I just wanted to add a few things. This is Jennifer Short. I was with Tim working on the pollinator task force. So I know quite a bit about it. And what concerns me the most about the state apiarist is that I really believe that it will undermine the cohesion of our normal way of doing business. We have local clubs and we have our state organization, and all of the local clubs and the state WASBA is involved in education and mentorship. And if we do have someone at a government level involved in that process. It's just a concern to me that we'll lose the cohesion with the clubs, that people will be less likely to go to the club and have a relationship with their local clubs where they should be getting their mentorship and where they should be getting their education. And they'll wind up going to, a government, phone number or a website because, it's easier. We all kind of default to what's the path of least resistance. And so it concerns me that that might happen. And it also, we have problems with with the state inspector. An apiarist would be a state inspector, which allows, it's kind of a slippery slope. And we all can admit that once you give somebody an inch, they take a mile, right? And so my concern is that with an inspector system, especially a mandatory inspector system, it's all of a sudden going to be mandatory that all of your locations are actually registered, because the inspector will want to show up at your locations for inspections and things. And also that it's been insinuated that they're going to go ahead and be a police officer to go ahead and regulate the amount of hives. You've heard Tim discuss the Xerces situation, where Xerces really is really anti-honeybee. And if they get their way, they will control the number of hives that are in any one locale. And that may not, be a problem in some locales, but in our suburban and urban settings, and certainly out here, I'm out in Island County, right? And so the islands are very isolated, and if that would occur for my island specifically, for Camino, well, all my units will be grandfathered in, and no one else will be allowed to have a hive on this island, because I have the majority of hives. I run 200 to 250 units on this island, and that means that no one else will be able to have beehives. Is that fair? Or is it better that I know all of my, beaks out here on the island, and when I know that there's somebody in a certain area, well, I reduce my apiary yard in that location so that their bees can have just as much forage as mine. And we discuss how to go ahead and treat for mites so that there isn't a drift issue between our two operations, right? So it's about more personal communication and relationships between us, and less government oversight. And certainly the potential for government overreach is phenomenal in this system. And this particular area is really looking to expand in the Department of Ag. So I would just caution to be careful. Thanks for letting me talk, Tim.
Well, that's fine. I was also going to comment that it's not being insinuated that a state apiarist would be a regulatory position. It is a regulatory position. About 25 years ago, I remember my dad and I being inspected by the state apiarist, and he was regulating and, telling us we couldn't move bees because they had American foul brood, or we'd have to burn them or whatever. And we're good enough beekeepers. We can manage our hives and not pass on diseases to our neighbors. But no, it is a regulatory position, and that's kind of one of the things I like about this new pollinator research extension person. You could go up to them and say you've read about Randy Oliver's work with the oxalic acid towel or sponge. You could go to this person from WSU and say, is anybody in our area using that? And how is it working in Washington State? Where if you said that to a state apiarist who's a regulator, he would say, why, if anyone's doing that, I should fine them because that's illegal. So, that there's some things you can't talk to a regulator about.
And also, one of the biggest problems, just as an piece of information, California has an inspection system, and they have regulators, apiary inspectors, and And we just saw, what was it, last year, one of the biggest pesticide, it wasn't a pesticide, it was an herbicide kill on beehives down there due to government. The government actually sprayed water hyacinths on waterways down there, didn't notify anyone. So the government is exempt from some of these things and are really the biggest violators of these problems. And, you know, do we want them to have, you know, a hold of this leash when they, you know, they aren't regulated themselves? So it's concerning to me that that they would wield power over our industry and really restrict our freedoms and our liberties. And so as an advocate and a board member, it really is, it's my passion and purpose to make sure that my fellow beekeepers are not restricted or regulated, over-regulated.
Rebecca, you had a question.
Yes, I did. I have a friend in Iowa who's a farmer, and she asked if, and I just moved here from Texas, but she asked if we had a state inspector. I said, no, I don't think so. And she said, did we register our bees with the state? And no, because she said it was for in case someone were spraying that we had to be, they had to let us know. So I wish I would have heard you earlier, because I went and took the survey. And the way that they phrased the question indicated to me, no, I didn't want someone spraying my bees. But now that you've explained it, it makes sense. Can I go and have a take back and redo my survey? Because I feel misled. Uh-huh.
I think you go to a different computer and follow that link again. I think it will let you.
Okay. But yeah, thank you for the information, because I was totally misled by what I should be doing.
I know. I was arguing with the folks in charge of that survey, and I had to bow out because I would make suggestions and they would just ignore me, you know. And they like you mentioned, they phrased it to make you think, oh, obviously I want this if I'm against my bees getting sprayed. But it's,
Exactly.
yeah. I was disappointed.
Part of the problem with the entire process has been a bit of subterfuge from my perspective. I was on the Education and Communication subcommittee, as well as the Managed Bee subcommittee. Tim was on a couple of different ones, and we had a couple other WASBA members that were on different ones to make sure that we had everything covered. And this particular item started in the Education and Communications subcommittee, and I vehemently argued it out of that subcommittee, only to find out that it showed up in the pesticide subcommittee about 3 months later. My concern with the actual registration process is that they are handing it. This is a non-bid contract, handing it to a company called FieldWatch that has absolutely no cybersecurity at all on their program or on their database. So that database certainly can be accessed and hacked, and your location can be vandalized and or damaged. So they just haven't thought out the details in enough, just enough, comprehensive thought to get a good product. It just seems like it's just being rammed through, and the product isn't well thought out or good for us beekeepers. So,
in the last in-person meeting of the Honeybee Task Force before COVID, I convinced a blueberry grower, to support the idea that beekeepers really don't want hive location registration. And so in that in-person meeting, I said, let's cut this from the recommendations. And he spoke up in favor. And we had a vote, raised our hands, and everyone present, well, the majority of those present in the meeting said, yes, let's take it out. The next meeting we had, it was back in. So the powers that be think they can run over beekeepers. They think that we're not powerful like the pesticide applicators in all of agriculture. And it's true, we're not. But we do have the ear of the legislature when we speak together. And that's why you know, whatever success I've had as a legislative guy for WASBA, it's because of you people, the beekeepers, that have been willing to email and call. And I really appreciate the passion that you have for honeybees and for beekeeping, because I wouldn't get anything done without your grassroots help.
We are fighters, aren't we?
I'm sorry, it's Becky again, but go ahead. I'm sorry. I had a question, or I had a thought.
Go ahead.
Okay. I taught in vocational classes in Texas, and the high school that I just left, the state of Texas has added on beekeeping to the ag classes. And I know in Washington, they have ag classes for high schoolers. So they're adding beehives and bee classes to the ag teacher to teach. Do they have such a thing in Washington as well?
I mentor the LaConner High School Beekeeping Club.
Oh, nice. Good.
So
Good.
we do have them all over. We have high schoolers and middle schoolers, 4-H as well as FFA. So so it's very popular. If you come up here into the rural areas of Skagit and Whatcom counties, where I represent a lot of beekeepers, there's a lot of school activity around beekeeping.
Okay, great. Thank you. So we could volunteer our time with this high school.
Absolutely. Please do. They could use all the help they can get.
Okay, thank you.
I'm looking for the link to the page where all of the meeting notes and recommendations from the task force are. I've got it someplace. Here it is. I'll post the link to it in the chat. It's pretty dense and there's a lot of stuff there. But if you go there, it has the recordings of the meetings, the subcommittees, shows who's on what committee, and it has the Pollinator Health Task Force report to legislature from November of 2020. That was the first one we did, and we just did another one. And the director, the Pollinator Health Coordinator that's in charge of this committee, told me they were going to put up the ones they just gave to the legislature last December. I don't see it on the webpage. But anyway, that's a link to more information on that. And if anybody here would like to get on the task force, I'm totally open to having more beekeepers serving. There are 5 committees: the Habitat Committee, the Pesticides Committee, the Education Committee, Committee on Managed Pollinators, and the Committee on Research. And I'm on all of them. So you won't be alone if you choose to join the task force. And the meetings are always open to the public too. You can, be a public person attending, and if you see a way you can contribute, I can sure get you as an official member going forward. Just email me. So Pat and Rebecca had good questions. Anybody else? I'm not trying to hurry off. I would like to answer more questions, but you have to ask them first. Ron, maybe we should, I should stop sharing and we just look at each other. Maybe that'll stimulate more questions. There we go.
So Tim, I have a question.
Go ahead.
So what is the task force going to do moving forward after they get this survey done? Do you have any idea what the timeline of the survey is, and when the product will get to the legislature?
I don't know when it'll be done. As I mentioned, they are doing a portion of it as a randomized sample. And that depends on when the people get around to returning the paper surveys that they get in the mail that have a number on them. And then the ones they don't get, they have to follow up on, try to get them to participate, or randomly choose someone else to answer that survey so that the whole survey can be considered valid. Tim Lawrence from, is it Island County Extension?
Yes, he's on Whidbey.
Oh, he would be Island Extension. Yes, he's WSU Extension. He helped design the experimental design of the survey to be sure it would be valid at the end. That's why part of it was randomized and numbered. And the rest of us that have just an email link or a live link, we can just go ahead and do it and make our feelings known. But I wouldn't expect the legislature to hear about it again until January next year when they meet again. Over the summer, well, beginning now and over the summer, the task force will be meeting and going over what remains from our recommendations and what hasn't been done yet, and make those recommendations to the legislature. If there's any new ideas that anybody comes up with, we can bring them to the legislature, or well, first off, bring them to the task force and see if there's support for the idea, and go from there. One thing that I proposed, I thought it was a good idea, that 25% of the landscaping in all future state-built buildings be pollinator habitat. I thought it was a good idea, and it was passed by the majority of the people. Then it got to the legislature, and the lobbyist for the landscapers was successful in inserting the word could be instead of must. Turned it into a suggestion instead of a commandment. Kind of shot the whole thing, but it's frustrating. You try to do what's right and folks are opposed, and they succeed, and we try our best, but anyway. So, but there are good things to do and good ideas to have. So
There's a question for you in the chat.
you're clear about the cons of the survey and the state apiarist. Are there any pros? Well, if you're a pesticide applicator, it'll make your life a lot easier to have apiary registration. There are some beekeepers who complain about other beekeepers crowding their apiaries, especially in Eastern Washington, where when your hives in Eastern Washington will be on pollination, and then when that crop finishes, where do you go with your bees? There's so little forage outside of paid pollination that you end up encroaching on other beekeepers. And so some Eastern Washington beekeepers would like to have some kind of a system to prevent hives being located too close to each other. But I don't really have a dog in this fight, because my bees leave after tree fruit pollination. I take them to the Dakotas, and I don't spend my summers here. But the commercial beekeepers I talk to, especially here on the east side where I'm from, they would like a system like that, but they can't see how it would be implemented. There's so much, I have yards here in Eastern Washington that I've had since the 60s, and it would just be a massive problem to try to institute a location registration system that would respect the existing locations without causing fistfights over, well, I had this location here 4 years ago. Well, I had this one here, and it'd just be a nightmare to try to implement. So, but yeah, there is some desire for location registration, but it's just at this point, it seems to be impossible to initiate now. The state apiarist, yeah, I mean, if you got the right person as a state apiarist, it could be a real pro. I'm acquainted with the South Dakota state apiarist, really nice guy, very helpful. But I think part of why he's so helpful is that he expects me to abide by the rules and respect other people's apiaries and keep my bees, clean from disease. And I do that, and we have a good relationship. The North Dakota State Apiarist is pretty similar. They seem to want to help more than hurt, and they realize that for many beekeepers, off-label mite treatments are necessary to keep your hives alive, and they're not out looking to catch you in what ends up being no danger to human health or bee health. However, the state apiarist doesn't have to be that way. The state apiarist could be a real stickler for everything. If like you tried Randy Oliver's blue shop towel oxalic acid treatment in your hive, well, technically that's illegal. But like I'm saying, these state apiarists that are understanding that say, yeah, I see that it's all generally recognized as safe ingredients, and you're not gonna, you're not being dumb about it. That's fine. Where another state apiarist might fine you, confiscate your hives, cause a lot of problems. And you just don't know what you're gonna get if you get a state apiarist. So there are pros and cons for sure. That's a good question, by the way. It's kind of funny. The number 2 state apiarist in North Dakota is from a little town in North Dakota where we have bees. And he wanted to take his mother-in-law out and show her some bees, excuse me. And so he asked me, I know you have bees right outside of town. Do you mind if I take my mother-in-law and show her what the inside of the hive is with your bees? I said, sure, go ahead. And, I had nothing to hide, and whatever he found in my hives, he didn't raise any red flags with him. So, he's one of the good ones, but not everybody is understanding and patient that way. Does anyone here remember anything about the previous state apiarist we had? Is anybody here old enough? No? I remember him. I was very young. I was a teenager when he was active. And yeah, I mean, in some ways he was good, but in other ways, not so good. Having a state apiarist means someone feels the need to regulate and protect. I remember that there was a man down, would have been Lewis County, I think. He brought up a load of bees from California to pollinate tree fruit here. And this was right at the beginning of the tracheal mite. The tracheal mite had just emerged as a pest. And the state apiarist was very concerned about tracheal mites coming to Washington State. And he forced this beekeeper to put his load of bees out in the sagebrush away from everything, and wouldn't let him go in and feed for fear that he would spread tracheal mites. Meanwhile, every day semi-loads were coming in for tree fruit pollination, and that semi-load died. And that's kind of the bad part of regulation. If you have someone in there who isn't flexible, who looks at the rules and says, well, how do you apply these to real people? Instead of, well, these are the rules and we have to make people apply to the rules. You have a very different outcome. So I wouldn't mind a good state apiarist. That would be fine. But can you guarantee you'll get a good one as opposed to a strict one who impinges on your ability to do things to keep your bees healthy? I don't know.
Hey, Tim, you good? I'm gonna take off.
Okay, see ya.
Bye.
Any bee questions you have, folks? Oh, how does a state apiarist come to be? Are they elected or appointed? They are hired. It's a position this Department of Agriculture would hire. Yeah. It'd be nice if they were elected, sure. Jennifer that just left, I'd vote her as state apiarist. She'd be good. Yeah, it's a job. So did anybody lose all their hives this winter? Or are you too embarrassed to raise your hand? I'll tell you, we lost like 40% this year. It was really tough. We had a drought. Everybody had a drought, and our bees did really poorly. So
I lost mine to yellow jackets.
oh, that's terrible.
Yeah, there were hundreds of them.
Wow. For ours, it was mostly like mites out of control and queens that failed before they got to raising their last round of brood, and yeah, that kind of stuff. Bears. Have you tried a bear fence?
I have, but we're reworking it to make it better this year.
Okay,
We found our mistakes and we're making it right.
cool. This last year, because of the drought, I had 5 apiaries up above Cooley Dam, way up in the trees, and the folks there told me I had to have bear fences. So I did, and no bears came down. But that was my first experience with bear fences.
Yeah, we've had them for 3 years, but this was our first year where the bears actually came and had fun.
Oh, yeah. For tree fruit pollination, we have 4 hives to a pallet, and we wrap a steel band around the 2 and then the 2 on the pallet. So there's 2 steel bands holding everything together. That way the guys on their tractors who move them way out into the orchard, they don't shake apart when they're moving them. And one time we had a bear come in and grab the lid on the corner and broke it in half. The steel band never broke, but the lid broke in half.
Yeah, we had ratchet straps over ours, and they were sitting on 4x4s on pure block. And so the ratchet straps didn't break, but they shredded the hives a couple different times and bent the pure block brackets. And yeah.
Wow.
Live and learn and try again.
Right. I'm happy to talk about bees or beekeeping or legislation or anything else.
Well, this is Becky again. I hate to ask so many questions, but the person who just talked about the bear, let me get off the Bluetooth. I'm sorry.
Who talked about the bear fence? Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. So I'm out in Gold Bar with my bees, and everyone said the bears were right in our area. So my son and I are just now putting up a bear fence, but the person who just spoke a while ago, did she have an electric fence up and the bear went through it?
Yes, but when I purchased the components for my fence, I was told by the sales associate to use poly tape, which I now know was wrong. So we're switching over to the wire rather than poly tape and having a stronger charger.
Okay. Okay.
Because yeah, they went right through it like it wasn't even there. And I
Oh,
only
man.
had 3 strands, and now we're going to have 5.
And are they all hot or hot and cold? Or hot and grounded? The 5?
Well, that's a question for my husband, but yes.
Okay. 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 Thank you.
I can tell you how we did ours.
Yes, please.
Oh,
So we have H-2A workers, temporary workers from outside the country. And this guy who was working with me that day that helped me set up the fences, he'd worked in Canada for some years, where all the apiaries have bear fence. And what he did was he tied it off really low to the ground, the first strand, and then went all the way around, and then went up about that much again with wire, not the poly tape, but the wire, and then went all the way back around again, and then up another one, and all the way back. So there were 5 strands, but they had to be really tight to the ground at the bottom, or else they dig underneath. And that's how he had us do it. I didn't know anything
Okay,
about
yeah.
it either. He taught me.
Yeah, this year our bottom 3 are closer together, and then the upper 2 are just a little bit further. But yeah, that's what we're doing as well.
Yeah, that's what we did.
Okay.
And then
So,
you have to mow the grass underneath the wire so it doesn't short out.
Right. Yeah.
another question about that, and the reading about it, someone said that they baited it first, that if the bear ever found they could get through,
Mhm.
they would just, run through it and not care. But that, but if you baited it so they got shocked first, they would have a tendency to go way around it. Do you have any information on that?
So I've heard about baiting it too, but only more recently. And I saw in the chat somebody was asking about hanging bacon. I was told that all you really have to do is just put like a spot of bacon grease on there, because all you want them, all you're trying to get them to do is touch it with their nose or their tongue, because that's
Okay.
where the shock, rather than trying to get through their fur.
Okay. And does anything else come that, for instance, my son has a wildlife camera up and there's raccoons. I've not seen a skunk yet. Do any of those bother the bees or just the bear?
Skunks eat bees.
Okay.
I have a lot of skunks in some of my yards, and I wish I carried a small caliber gun with me to shoot them whenever I see them. Anthony, you had a question?
Yes, hi Tim, and thanks for being here today. This is really good. I've had a lot of trouble with, well, I did find some bear scat near, I have apame hives, they're latched down, but a bear can cause a lot of problems. What I've been using around all my flowering plants and fruit trees and berries and around my beehives, I have these motion detected water blasters. I used to use Bell and Howell, but they're cheaply made and they fell apart. But I have some Orbits made by a company called Orbit. You hook them up to your garden hose. Of course, you can't use them when it's freezing out, but I have it through like spring. I'm going to be putting them out next week, all through until it freezes. And they have solar panels on them. You hook up to the water hose, and you can set the timer, the angle, the distance, and everything. I used to get blasted when I was mowing my yard, forgetting to turning the faucet off. I mean, it just shoots and it just blasts you with water, just short bursts, and it'll go around, like 180 degrees. And but the Orbits, you can program them so they like from sunset to dawn. You leave them on, and I have videos of deer and raccoons and possums and things. They just freak out and they take off. And I'm not saying that, I don't know if it'll work for bear, but anything that'll spook an animal like that. But it solar charges the batteries. You just hook them up to your water hose, and it works. It's been working for me.
Does it have like a targeting system?
It's motion detection in it at like a range of like 30 feet, and you can set I think with these you can set the sensitivity, but you can have it going like 180 degrees or even more than that. So I put them on the corners where my bees are, and you can hook them up together. And yeah, if any animal comes by, that thing will just go pow 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 pow, just like that, and it's sweet, and then it'll shut off. It'll shut off and then reset. And I got pictures of deer just freaking out and taking off. And otherwise, they're eating all the blackberries and all the blossoms of all the everything. But keeps them away. Skunks, anything like that. You can aim it, any direction or any angle.
That's neat. So it's motion detection, and then it just sweeps once it detects motion.
Yes, it's made by a company. Yeah, it's the name of it is Orbit. But if you see the Bell and Howell, I would advise not getting those. I've had 2 of them, and I advised one for a friend, and they fall apart, and I was always repairing them. I haven't tried the Orbits, but there's a lot of reviews. It's ORBIT. You can check it out. Hook it up to your. I have a faucet out there, and I just hook them up to the garden hoses, and they just sit there, and I have it so it won't go off in the day and get me in. I fall over with my wheelbarrow. I'm getting surprised by it. But it really, when you get hit by that thing, it soaks you, and the animals don't like it.
It's good advice. Thank you.
Yeah,
that's cool. Now we need somebody, with some tech experience to actually do a targeting system. But yeah, that would work though. You're right. Oh,
Yeah.
There's a link to it. Cool. Motion activated sprinkler, yard enforcer. Sounds great.
Yeah. Also, Tim, on the legislative, when I saw that survey, first thing I did, after looking through the questions, they're like loaded questions. That's how I felt. I shredded it, and then I talked to another beekeeper in our club, and they said, "Well, we're going to answer it because we want to tell them we don't want this for the reasons that they were going to state." And whenever I see the government, so I was in federal government for like 29 years, and whenever the federal, state, county, and local, when they get involved, something starts out small, and then they expand it, and then I felt it was going to start costing us money, and then they got us. And it's kind of like the Department of Ecology. I think it was when it started way back when, it was just an advisory group. And if I'm not mistaken, I think it's something like 3,000 employees now. And it took me years to be able to build a garage where I'm at. Going through all the studies and surveys, it took me years just to be able to build a garage. I live on the water. I'm in Jefferson County in the Peninsula. So,
Yeah, that's a tough one there. That whole riparian deal is just, this is the wrong state to live on the water with your own land.
Mm-hmm. And with the bees, now I have other beekeeper friends in Port Townsend, and one of them was getting thousands of mites, and because they had a neighbor, and we talk about these hippie beekeepers, they won't use even organic pesticides for their mites. And I've known 3 of them, like around Chimicum, Port Ludlow, and they said, "Oh no, my bees don't have mites." That's a common thing because they don't see them. And I told them, "Your bees will be dead, your colonies will be dead in 2 years." And sure enough, but what happens, it contaminates the other beekeepers. So in that survey, of course, we're concerned, how can we get people educated, and to comply, because they may not want to.
Yes, it is a huge deal that so many people think they can. I'm a new grandpa. I have 3 grandkids under a year, and it's really fun. And I expect my grandbabies to get vaccinated. I expect them to be cared for and loved by their parents, watched over, prevented from walking on the tops of cliffs and from getting too close to water when they're toddlers. To leave your hives without any kind of treatment, even organic, is utterly irresponsible and inhumane. And it's also a danger to your neighbors besides that. But I mean, folks like that don't take care of their bees. I'm old enough to remember bees before mites, before varroa mites.
Mm-hmm.
Those were the days when you didn't have to be a good beekeeper. Bees would take care of themselves. But since, technically bees are an invasive species, they haven't existed here. Honeybees were in North America before the last ice age. They were. They just came back in about 1600 with the Europeans, but you know, they require, because of international trade and the pests and diseases that we now have, they require us to care for them.
Mhm.
If we don't do that, we're just negligent, and it makes me sick. So yeah, it's hard, you know, and you want to bring somebody's neck. No, you want to encourage better behavior on
Yeah.
the part of other beekeepers. You really do,
Mhm.
because you know you buy a package and it lives great for a year and a half, and then that's it, like clockwork.
Yeah.
It's great business for people who sell packages, but it's not good for honeybees or their neighbors.
Yeah.
I agree. But that's a local problem. I mean, what's the state going to do about that? Even if there were a state apiarist, they can't enforce you to use X mite treatment. Even if they tried, how could they? You know, they don't have the budget for it. They don't have the people for it. So it's up to us as beekeepers to be the good example of what good beekeeping looks like. This is what it looks like when your hive lives year to year to year and is productive and, you know, performs the ecosystem services for the neighborhood and produces honey for you and your neighbor. I hope that prevails in the long run. Yes, white Europeans were also an invasive species, but I think the Vikings were here before honeybees, really, though, weren't they? 14, 13 something, the Vikings came. But right, if honeybees truly are going to be considered an invasive species and eliminated from North America, you would eliminate all of pollinated agriculture just about. You know, you couldn't buy an apple or a pear or a cherry. There would be so little of it. It would be so expensive. Vegetable, you know, carrot seed, onion seed, tons of that stuff is grown over here where I am. And it's all pollinated by honeybees. And there's not enough native pollinators to do it. There was, when a big apple orchard was 5 acres, native pollinators could handle that, but not Grant County, where I am. I think Grant County has $1.6 billion in agricultural production. The leading crop is apples. There are square miles of apples here. And there are very few native pollinators in there. So those honeybees have to stay healthy to provide that, even though they're non-native. This is the world in which we live. And for those who think that honeybees don't belong, get used to a much poorer diet. You know, we're all beekeepers. We're all familiar with the arguments that if you didn't have honeybees, you would have a diet that was much more bland. You have corn and potatoes and rice, and not much more. Nuts? Well, no, you wouldn't have nuts because almonds and many others are pollinated by bees or other insects. So, yeah. Someone referred to the WSU fungus research. So Jennifer Hahn and Nick Nager, they're postdocs at WSU. They're working on that. They've been working on it for years. And I'm one of the people holding them back from releasing that to the public. They're trying to. So the problem with the fungus is that it grows in cool, damp places. And the beehive is damp, but it's not cool. And so if you were to introduce that fungus into a beehive, it wouldn't last very long. I've had some of my hives participate in these studies with WSU and seen that it doesn't work well yet. Scientifically, they're counting mites that are dropped by the fungus, and that's great. But I'm holding them back because I want them to produce a product that is overwhelmingly successful. You know, I am so sick of seeing labs come out with this trumpeting this wonderful new method, and it's marginally effective. So Nick and Jen have been trying to breed fungus that will reproduce and thrive at a higher temperature and still in the same moisture. And that would stay in a beehive and and be effective over time. And so I'm hoping they can hold off until they have something that will actually do that. In my book, it's not ready for prime time. So that's my opinion on that. They may offer it commercially before I know it. I don't know. But for one thing, I would just be so embarrassed if WSU put out a product that beekeepers poo-pooed because it didn't work very well. I'm an idealist, though. I want to see mites eradicated. This week, we just finished with the interviews of the 4 finalist candidates for that research and extension position. And I asked the last candidate, what would it take to eradicate varroa mites? And the candidate said, oh, that'll never happen. It's just people have been trying for too long and throwing too much money at it. We're just going to have to learn to live with it, learn to live with bees that are more resistant and that have better hygiene, and try to do better at keeping their populations down. Well, that's what we're at now, and you're seeing the losses that we're having. That's not acceptable. I remember what a joy it was to keep bees when mites were not here, and I still enjoy it, but man, it was a lot more fun without bees. And so that's one thing I'm going to be pushing whoever this new candidate is, to take a multidisciplinary approach, assemble a team, toxicologists, parasitologists, anybody else that might have a brain, and see if they can't come up with an eradication method. Because the candidate said, if someone were to come up with that, they'd be a millionaire and they'd win the Nobel Prize. Well, let's do it then. That's my opinion. So I don't know. We'll see what we get. Any advances in pheromone trapping of mites? None that I'm aware of. I think it's a good idea. We know that they're attracted to brood pheromone. I don't know that anybody's isolated what aspect of that pheromone they're especially attracted to where you could put it in a trap. That's a good idea if such a thing existed, like a hive beetle trap. But no, I'm not aware of any advances yet as far as being applicable to beekeeping yet. If you have any experience in pheromone isolation, hey, contact WSU and work with them. Come up with something. You never know who's in one of these Zoom meetings. Maybe there's a chemist who is very experienced in volatiles, help us out on that. Looks like we're starting to drop off. Does anyone left want to get involved in the legislative committee and help out with the legislative stuff? If so, just speak up and I'll put you on the list. It's been especially easy since COVID because I don't even have to leave my house to testify before a committee. It's been nice. Well, Ron, it looks like I'm turning it back over to you.
Thanks, Tim.
Thanks for letting me come. I enjoyed it.
Absolutely. Yeah, unfortunately, Eli had that other meeting happen the same time as our club meeting, but we'll get her, go back and rewatch the video.